Hey everyone, I wanted to welcome you all to the first of hopefully many Stryd Webinar series. The purpose of this webinar is to answer a couple questions. So how I've been structuring my training with Stryd and how does that compare to what I was doing before? How I track progress with Stryd using Training Peaks, Power Center, and Google Sheets. How I use the data to make adjustments based on this data and based on the feedback that I'm getting. And how I raced with the Stryd to break 2 PRs back to back, and then also apply all of this to future applications and making tweaks to my own training, which hopefully will carry on to improving your training and how you can use and analyze your own data for instant feedback. For the record, I am not a pro using Stryd. I am not a pro at analyzing power. I am no Andrew Coggin. I am no Jim Vance. So I am learning a ton, just like as everyone else in the community is, because running with power is a brand new technology, and it's a fun technology. It's got a huge future before it, and I think it really will start taking off. But for the record, I am not a pro, so if I say anything that is wrong or misinformed, or you think that I misspoke, please let me know. Reach out to me, because the more we know, the more we grow, as my elementary school teachers used to say. So going from there, also power numbers and resulting metrics, they're all individual. They vary widely from athletes to athletes, more so in running than in cycling, and you cannot compare yourself to my numbers, my paces, my heart rates, and everyone is their own individual, unique snowflake, but don't waste your time trying to compare yourself to others when it comes to power data. I see it a lot on the Stryd Facebook page, and it's not helpful psychologically, and it doesn't help you at the end of the day. What is important is you running faster, so hopefully information from this webinar to take you into your training and apply to your own training to make you a faster athlete. So as an intro, I've been using the Stryd Footpod since January, but I have been really using it since the beginning of June. And what I mean by that is that when I first ordered it, it was not a tool that influenced my training. It was a tool I put the footpod on my shoe and I looked at trends. I said, oh, this is my typical easy run wattage, this is my typical hill wattage, this is my typical brick workout if I ran off the bike wattage, this is my typical whatever wattage, and it wasn't really influencing it. If it was higher or it was lower, I said, oh, that's cool, I'll just keep on doing what I'm doing. And it did not change my training. I wasn't using the data, it was just a cool number to have. That changed, though, when I moved recently to Canada. I moved to get my master's in sports psychology, and with that I decided to go back to being a full-time runner again, which is where my use of Stryd has really picked up. And not only am I using it, I'm training by it. So it's influencing my training by the day. I'm looking at the numbers, I'm crunching the numbers, and taking all of the information to improve what I am doing. So with that, I wanted to go into what does my current training look like. And if you look up on the screen here, I do have my Training Peaks account. So this June 8th is when I started, actually this June 2nd is when I started to get into training with power and using the Stryd, I wouldn't say religiously, but consistently. And this was my first week back, so you can see here that it was, a basic week. In general, I am following my own training plan. I designed this myself. It is loosely based out of Matt Fitzgerald's 80-20 training program. So 80% of my runs are at zone 1s and zone 2, and 20% are at zones 4 and 5. So what that typically looks like is on Tuesdays I have a fast finish or a tempo workout. Thursdays or Fridays I have a speed workout, be that a fartlek or a hill run, and then on the weekends I include a long run, sometimes with a fast finish, but I will get to that later on in the webinar. So that's and everything else is zone 2. So how did I set that up? If you look back at the first week, I did a 3-6 run test. So I ran 3 laps, and then I ran 6 laps all out with 30 minutes in between to get full recovery. And from there, I plugged it into the Stryd Power Center, which you can see the tab up here, the Stryd Power Center, and it generated an FTP number for me, which set up my zones. And I took that number, plugged it into my Training Peaks, and went from there. It was that easy. And the reason why I did the 3-6 test instead of the 30-minute or 20-minute TT that you might have read in Run with Power is because I had just started running full-time again. I didn't particularly want to do a 30-minute TT. I didn't have time for it. I didn't want to recover from it, so I just did a 3-6 test, plugged those numbers into, it was a lot easier, a lot less stressful, and I could continue on my training without overdoing it the first week back. And from there, I have set up my zones and set up my training, and each week I have been progressing. So typically I do 2 weeks on, 1 week off. Sometimes, especially in this first month of training, I did 3 weeks because that first week was lighter than typical. But otherwise, it's going to be 2 weeks on, 1 week recovery. So I'm going to scroll down here to June 12th. So this week was a build week, and then a recovery week. You see I got my off day there, leading into 2 races at the beginning of July. So this was my first block back of training. And if we look at what I mean by 80% or not, how can I track that I am going at 80% of my FTP? And this is where you can track this with power or with heart rate. But the thing with heart rate is that it fluctuates from day to day. It's the summer, it heats up, there's a lot of heat and humidity here in Kingston, so with that, my heart rate fluctuates by the day, and you're going to see when I switch over to my Google Sheets that my heart rate does fluctuate, but power does remain constant, so it's an input function versus an output function. So how do I track whether I really went at 80%? Well, if I pull up a standard foundation run, and I look down at intensity factors, that should be right around 0.8. And I'm going to show you over on my Google Sheets in just a little bit what that looks like over time, just to make sure that I'm hitting that 80% range. Other things that I'm doing within my training of note, because that does influence power, is I'm also weightlifting. I just started weightlifting. I got back into the gym, and I'm weightlifting heavy 2 times a week. What that looks like is usually a squat or a deadlift, and then some ancillary single leg work, as well as every single day doing hip mobility and hip flexor strengthening with body weight. So that does influence power because it's a stress. So I did want to mention that. Let's look overall. So what do I use Training Peaks? As far as analysis goes, let's look at the three tabs I've got up here. I've used Training Peaks, I use a Google Sheets, and then I use the Stryd Power Center. I also use Strava, but that's more for the social aspect of it. I don't really use it for analysis. I bet you could, but I don't. And what I use Training Peaks for is to lay out my whole entire season. And also to get a bigger picture. So if we look at the summary, this is the benefits of Training Peaks that I find, is that I can see the whole entire weekly summary. I can see that my fitness is going up, my fatigue is also growing up, and my form, training stress balance there, is going down. And this is the great thing about Training Peaks, is I can track that over time and then make sure on my recovery weeks that dips. That my fatigue and my form comes into proper play, my fatigue goes down, and my fitness tries to stay the same, especially going into these 2 races. Another way I use Training Peaks is to get a bigger snapshot picture at my overall forecast and previous forecast for running. So if I look at my performance management chart for the last 30 days, because that's when I started using Stryd, I can see that the first 3 builds I was progressing. My fatigue was increasing, which is typical. My form was dropping, but also my fitness was increasing. And I hit this peak and I went down into recovery mode. That was my off day right there. And then over the course of this week, leading into the race, I didn't do as much work finishing off with the race, and then coming back on the 3rd, have started to build once again, and that was my hill workout yesterday, you can see there. So once again, my fatigue goes up, my form goes down, and my fitness is creeping up, and this is a good way to make sure that I'm not overdoing it. And the reason why power is particularly good here is because it gives you TSS and not heart rate TSS. Heart rate TSS, it's an algorithm that Training Peaks uses, but the benefits of running with power is that I get a more accurate TSS number that I can gauge and compare from workout to workout without having to worry about influences such as how hilly the course was, how hot and humid it was, how cold it was. All of those influence your heart rate, but your power remains pretty steady in those different variables. And also in Training Peaks, another thing I like to look at is the peak power. So if we look over the past 3 weeks, these are my peak power numbers for 5 seconds, 1 minute, 5 minutes, 20 minutes, and 60 minutes. And you can see that for the shorter durations, my power has been going up, which is great. Especially if I'm focusing on stuff like a 10K and a mile, the fact that these are increasing is awesome. What you do notice is that my 60 minutes does decrease from 270 to 265. It does creep up. I haven't finished out the work. I still have my long run tomorrow, and it does creep back up. But that is something to notice, that over a long time, if your 60-minute peak power starts to drop and you're a marathon or half marathon runner, you may need to address that through different types of workouts, because that column right there is very important for developing endurance runs and predicting your marathon and helping you with your marathon times and half marathon times. Another good thing here is with the columns, I can see how much I'm running, if I'm progressing too quickly, and my overall TSS for the week. So that's what I use Training Peaks for. It's just an overall snapshot. It allows me to forecast my runs, or structure my overall training plan for the year, and then take a bigger snapshot of how I'm progressing. But the problem I find with Training Peaks is that if I switch back over the calendar here, there we are. I can't compare all of my foundation runs. I can't compare all of my high intensity runs in one place at one time. So what I like to do there is I use Google Spreadsheets. I'm sure you could use it with WKO. I'm sure you could do it with Golden Cheetah. I like Google Spreadsheets because I find the interface friendly. It's easy, no frills, and I can just look at the numbers and look at trends over time. So what I've done is I've created a foundation runs here, fast finishes, long runs, sprint workouts. So I've created bins, and I've placed all the metrics for each individual type of workout into those bins. So I can have all my fast finishes in one sheet, all my races in one, all my hills in another, and I can look over time at those specific workouts and compare apples to apples. So in this, I've got my EI, which stands for the efficiency index. I'm actually going to pull up the metric definitions. I've got my running efficiency factor, which is the difference between normalized power and average heart rate. So that does include heart rate because that is a good ratio of efficiency. You have running effectiveness, power in watts per kilogram. So if you're a cyclist, you're very familiar with that number. Duty time, flight time, stride rate, normalized power, form power, ground contact time, vertical oscillation, leg spring stiffness, which is a stride metric that you can find over in the Stryd Power Center. So those are what I have going up top, and these are in green what I'm really looking at. The main focus is efficiency in my runs and what I'm looking for. So if I'm looking over my past from June 12th all the way up to today, have I been becoming more efficient? Have I become a more efficient runner? Is the amount of wattage I'm producing going to improving my speed? And that's what EI looks at. And if you look at it, I started at 8.2 and my numbers aren't really changing. Even on recovery days or when I'm feeling a little tired, my EI is still around that 0.8 number. Efficiency, it's improving a little bit. It's going from the low 60s all the way up to the 80s. So it's improving a little bit here, but it still backs down into the 70s. So it hasn't, I wouldn't say, really improved drastically, especially with the summer heat. That number fluctuates quite a bit. This run right here was very cold outside. It was a gorgeous day, which is why my heart rate was 147. If I look at my RE, it's still in the 0.9s for between 0.94 and 0.90. It fluctuates back and forth in that range. It's not really improving. So have I been improving? According to those numbers, no, but that's not the be all and end all of running efficiency. If we look at this form percentage, what this is, this looks at how much of my total power, how much of my power is going towards pushing me up and down and left and right, but anywhere else but forward. So how much of the power am I wasting? And that goes from 32, roughly speaking, 32%, and gradually decreases over the course of those 3 weeks, down to 29. Not a huge difference, but it is trending in a good direction to show that I am producing more watts to push me forward rather than from side to side. I'm wasting less watts. Also, another thing that's improving is my watts per kilogram. And this is not only because my weight's dipping from 152 to 148, so 4 pounds, but also because my overall power is increasing. If we look at my normalized power, it starts in the 260s and it's now trending in the high 260s. So the combination of those two things has made my watts per kilogram go from 3.71 to almost 4.0 in an easy run. So that obviously is showing me that I am progressing. Other things, and improving. Other things you can look at here is, my average time, but that varies by the route that I choose, how tired I am. So you can't really use this as a good metric right here, nor can you really use average heart rate. My cadence has remained pretty steadily. My duty time and my flight time has remained pretty steady. Also, because these are easy runs, zone 1 and 2 runs, it's good to see that I'm not creeping up into zone 3 and I'm sticking in that 80% of FTP zone. But I also wanted to show you here how I can track stuff like sprint workouts and look at the difference between foundation runs and sprint workouts. So what I've done here, and this is another reason why I like Google Sheets, is because I can look at my overall metrics for the speed work, but I can also look at an individual snapshot of those 2 minutes. So if I do this workout again later on, maybe in end of this month, beginning of August, I can see, am I going faster for those 2 minutes? Am I producing the same amount of watts? What's my heart rate like for those 2 minutes? And I have it all in one spreadsheet so I can compare them. But you can also see that when I increase the speed, my power jumps drastically. My form percentage, I don't know why that is. I wasn't able to get the data for this one, but my form goes up significantly, my RE goes up significantly, my EF goes up, and my EI goes up, showing that when I'm at a faster pace, my efficiency doesn't remain the same, it actually improves, which is a good sign. My form percentage in particular, and my watts per kilogram. So this is another thing I can use to look at improvement. So it's gone from 4.96 to 5.23, not only because I've lost weight, but because I am producing more power with that weight loss. So that is how I organize my data and analyze my data to make changes in my training load and my training schedule. But now I want to move on to my races. So I signed up. I'm going to switch back to Training Peaks here so you can see that's this week. See this past weekend. So I did not taper for this. I fit these 2 races into my training week. It was a low week, so meaning volume was down, but intensity could have gone up because it wasn't too much of a TSS. So I raced a mile, all-out mile in celebration of Canada Day on the 1st of July, and then a 10K the day after on the 2nd. And I did not want to, I wasn't peaking for these. These were just fun races that I wanted to do. So for the mile, I'm going to pull up and analyze here. So for the mile, it was a 2-lap course in downtown Kingston. So some fluctuations in grade, not terrible. As far as grade goes, you had slow increases, but you got that for 2 laps. And so it was an honest course. And I did not race with power for this one. I did not look at my power meter at all. I just wanted the post-race data. I just went off RPE and where I was placing and just put the pedal to the metal, as the expression goes, for the whole entire course. And the course was a little bit long. My overall entire workout does include me not hitting the stop button at the finish line because I raced through the finish line instead of hitting the stop button, which I don't really care about because what I can do in Training Peaks is just select that first mile. And that first mile I came in at 4:47, which is a 15-second PR for me, including my college track time. So this was a huge PR that honestly really came out of nowhere. I was not expecting this at all, to be able to race this fast. And if we look at my normalized power, it was 365, which is 1.1% of my 10K percentage, which is actually where, just not exactly where, but just below where Stryd and other people recommend you race at for mile repeats. They recommend 1.2% of your 10K wattage. I was at 1.1. That's because I'm not a sprinter or haven't trained like a sprinter. If I worked on my VO2 max, worked on my sprinting speed, I'm sure I could get that number up to 1.2. But being 1.1% of my 10K FTP or my 10K wattage, I think that's pretty good. especially for the time given. Now, if I switch back over to my runs with power and look at my racing, this is another great thing. I can look at my efficiency, I can look at my EI, my EF, and my RE, see if that one, my form percentage, and my watts per kilogram. And if I do a mile again, whether they be mile repeats or whether they actually be a race, I can look at my efficiency. So that was the mile race on Saturday. On Sunday, I went over to Wolf Island, which is on Lake Ontario, and I raced the 10K. I haven't raced an open 10K, I think, since for a couple years. I've done a couple in Olympic distance races, but this was the first good, honest metric. You can see that the course was a little short. That could be a Garmin error, I don't know, but everyone races the same course, so I'm not going to hold Garmin to the gold standard. I'm going to analyze it here. All right. Now, if you look down at, I'm going to show you the feet to show you what I was going to go in with it. Let me show you my heart rate, and let me show you my pace, and let me hide the workout. So this was the course. It was an out and back 10K course, and you can see it was, it had a lot of short, steep hills, but it was an undulating course. And because I knew it was an undulating course, I knew that I took my FTP 10K or my FTP 330, and that was predicted for my 3.9 time or my 3.6 race time, track workout test. And I took that and said, all right, I'm going to be conservative for the first half and be just under 330. I want to be conservative because I know that if I go out too quickly, this second half of the race is going to be really, really hard, especially with those long, slow hills. So I wanted to take the first half and go just under 330, which I did. So if you just look at the purple line, which is my watts, and let me see if I can hide the others. From here all the way here, with the exception of the really first, I went out too quickly, but you can see that there. With the first half, it was lower than the second half. After the second half, after the turnaround, and that's where my wattage drops when I went around the cone, I picked it up and increased it to over 330. Overall, I normalized just above 330, but that was my race plan. So I wanted to have a negative split on the second half with a higher power. And the reason why I didn't want to go off heart rates or zones, so I'm going to put my heart rate back on. The reason why I didn't want to go heart rates or zones, heart rate or pace on this race is because of all these hills. I know that if I race by heart rate and said I'm going to race all zone 3 heart rates, well, because of these hills, that's going to influence it. That's going to be a problem. Also on Wolf Island, it's windy. I didn't know how the wind would affect. It would have brought up my heart rate superficially and might have slowed my race. So I just raced with power. If you look down at my my Garmin, all I had was power up top and then lap splits on the bottom and cadence. That was all I had. Didn't look at heart rate, didn't look at anything. The only reason why I had cadence on there is because I was curious, but I really didn't use anything but the power number. And that is what led me to a 35-15 10K split, which is I think a minute, 25 second PR from a track race I ran in college 7 years ago. So definitely a huge improvement and a great start to my racing season. So what am I going to do with this data? It's great that I have the data, it's great that it's showing progress, but what am I going to do with it, and how can I look at my next training block? Because I'm still in the base mode here. I'm still looking at improving my speed skills, my muscular endurance, and my aerobic base, my aerobic fitness, as well as my ability to burn fat more for fuel. I'm still in that base phase right here. I'm in it for another 2 training blocks, and then I switch into speed work in my second phase, my build phase, and then go into my race specific phase when I get end of August, get closer to the half marathon, and then the marathon in October. So how am I going to use this data to improve? Well, first off, I look at my foundation runs and realize that my efficiency, although these are improving, which is great, and I hope they continue to improve with increased normalized power, maybe a little bit more weight, but more normalized power, but I really want to focus on getting my form power continue to decrease, and also see if I can work on my efficiency and my EI and my EF, and see if I can bring those up. How can I bring those up? Well, if you look over here at my cadence, my cadence, which is right here, it's still in the 80s for easy runs. Now that's not horrible. We all have different paces. If there was actually a study that was just published that showed that Kenyan marathoners have between 80 and 85 for easy runs when they're running 8-minute miles, so I'm not alone in having a lower cadence, but I think a general cadence, improving cadence, would be better for me. And I've read studies that show that you shouldn't really focus on improving your cadence. Instead, you need to focus on the things that get you a better cadence. What that means is better mobility, better hip strength, and better form. And what you can do there is do more hill work. So I'm going to be doing more hill work in the next training block. Also, I'm going to, because I want to focus on my 60, if we flip back over to my dashboard, because I want to increase this, zoom on down, this 60-minute and 20-minute power number, I'm going to start to include fast finishes on some of my long runs. Because I'm still in the base phase, I don't want to overdo it, but including a fast finish on every other long run I think will be beneficial. I also want to see how my power numbers are influenced by my weightlifting. If we flip back to my runs with power, I mentioned over here that I started right on 19. This run right here, which was a little bit slower than the rest, was after I weightlifted. So I noticed that my power number, it was more of an effort to run there. So I have to be careful of that. And this is another great thing about running with power, if my RPE goes drastically up and these numbers drop, meaning I become less efficient, but my pace doesn't, that means my weightlifting is negatively influencing my running, which I don't want, and it means I have to change up my lifting pattern. So that's what I'm going to be doing going forward as far as using the Stryd to improve my race performances. Anyway, I have a 10K coming up in August, so I will do a recap before that race, and then I have a half marathon in September, so I'll do a recap then, and then finally finish off the year with a marathon. So I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know if you have any questions. You can reach me through my website at braveheartcanada.com. Anyway, I hope you all are enjoying running with your power, and definitely share your thoughts, share your comments. If you have any insights on my data, I would be more than happy to get your opinions. Thank you very much, and I will talk to you all later.